I've been ideologically poly my whole life. I had my first poly relationship 33 years ago when I was 15. That doesn't mean that I was always actively practicing poly, but my value system is poly. Right now I am, for the first time in 34 years, single, and I'm busy having a relationship with myself. So it's an evolutionary process. And I've had successful poly, and I've had disaster poly, and I've also identified my whole life as bisexual, so it does give me options in that regard as well. I have relationships with human beings. I don't have relationships with genders, and so that's basically what the story is for me.
Well, I can think of going to church camp and being with a bunch of friends, and we decided to be Mormons for the weekend. I have a friend from that time that last night, I don't want to call it. Anyway, I am the queen of multitasking, and I sort of vibrate at a level of energy and emotional and sexual energy than the average bear, and we're monogamous partners. So I think I probably always been this way, but I moved out here in 1999. And with my kids and school, I couldn't get them to school right away, so I was homeschooling with them and all that, and we had a computer. And so to network and find people to talk to who were adults, I went on, I think it was Yahoo Personals, and they, at that time, didn't take postal codes, they did zip codes, the only one I could think of was 90210. So I met a lot of people in LA, and this polyamory thing, and so I started checking it out, and I thought, holy crap, this is my whole life, this is wonderful. You mean I don't do monogamy badly? Awesome! There's people like me around, and I found that there was a group in Vancouver, that social group, and I was unable to get to the meeting, so I started in Victoria, thinking there's got to be other people around. And I met a wonderful partner that I've been with pretty much since then. And he is wired for poly as well, and so we started a relationship as poly. And I've been looking to add partners for years and years and doing poly badly. And having some fun and interesting moments. And finally, 2 years ago, found our partner, Danny, and we've been living together as a triad for 2 years, and it's been just great. And my goal has always been a poly household where lots of people live together in interrelated relationships. And at one point, I was thinking it would be a poly old folks home by the time I ever had.
Right, so some people are wired for polyamory, obviously, since the beginning. I was not one of those lucky bastards. So, my wife and I started off monogamous, and relatively early on in our marriage, I joined the military. So I joined the military, and one day I decided to make a comment to my wife, kind of half joking, half testing the waters, and I asked about a threesome. And my wife says, well, I've already thought about that. And I was like, holy crap, really? And so I said, well, really? And she goes, yeah, with you and my friend Mariah back home. And I said, well, because now we moved away to the military. I said, well, why didn't you tell me when we were back home? And she said, well, I just didn't think it was important. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me? Penis, of course it's important. So, all joking aside, I did say those things to my wife, we always tease each other. But at that point, I really had to look at it. It's easy for me to say, to be like, well, heck yeah, I get more girls, sweet, But I really try to take a mature view of it and look at it, and that's when we start talking about, like, okay, if this is something we're going to pursue, how are we going to go about that? And I actually had a coworker at one time that assumed that there are no rules to poly. It's just a free-for-all, and that's totally inaccurate. Unfortunately, it's a bad stereotype. So we talked about boundaries and where we felt comfortable, safe-sex agreements, how it was going to affect our children and stuff, as I mentioned before. And then that's when we really started defining, like, what kind of path do we want to go down? And since then, it's been really awesome. But yeah, same thing. Some are really successful, and some aren't so successful, just like maybe monogamous relationships. You know, you get your bad apples and your sweet ones too. And the second question was, is it growing? So something I wanted to add to that, there's this great book that came out not that long ago called Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan. And they're really looking at a lot of the research scientifically that humans may not have always had this monogamous ideal, that there was more open relationships and community type family structures. And so I think that for a lot of us, we're realizing monogamy doesn't work for everybody. You look at the rates of divorce, you look at, monogamous friends, their relationships are going to hell too. And it's interesting sometimes, when people, you tell them you're polyamorous and like, oh, the last partner didn't quite work out, they say, well, that's your problem, polyamory, right? But when somebody's monogamous relationship fails, nobody says, well, that's your problem, monogamy. So yeah, definitely, people are hungry for other options. And as I've said before, for some people it's awesome, other people not so much. But we all definitely have our niche, and once you kind of are more truthful with your needs and yourself, you'll find those niches. And the last question, Mary, was sleeping guy. Yeah, everybody kind of glaze over that one. For me, not yet. I'm taking the application. That one. For me, not yet. I'm taking the application.
How would you distinguish poly from swinging?
Well, there's one easy way to make the distinction that I've come up with, is that polyamory remains with the individual. It's something that you can ask yourself and then ask the people that you're with. Swinging tends to be more of two people as an entity. So a couple, they decide to go and do this.
Poly people can be swingers.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. There doesn't have to be a distinction.
Yeah, definitely. The way I generally tell people my definition goes is that polyamory is about multiple relationships, whereas swinging a lot of times is about more of a physical experience. And like they mentioned, some swingers are acting more like they're poly. Some poly people are acting more like they're swingers. When you really get into the swinger community, though, the forbidden phrase is "I love you," and that is absolutely true. So that's why I define it as the difference between long-term relationships versus just an experiment or for fun or whatever, just having sex. But there's a lot of debate around these two terms, and the reason why is because these cultures they cross over so much, and some people that are they identify as swingers, but they're totally practicing poly, and you're like, oh, you're poly, and they're like, hell no, I'm not, I'm a swinger, right? And vice versa, people that are poly, they're like, hey, I'm poly, but you're like, no, you're kind of acting more like a swinger. But if you don't trip up too much over the definitions and just find out what's right for you, that's the bottom line, right? What makes you happy.
Also, when you're in a polyamorous situation, sex isn't a given. You can love somebody without having sex with them.
Absolutely.
Don't think you can do that as a swimmer. So it's a very different definition, but the crossover is constant, mostly because both lifestyles are still considered fringe. And so we're all grouped in together, something like Captain was saying earlier about the homosexual movement and poly being grouped together as well. So it's about being fringe, and that's where a lot of the confusion comes from.
Something else, I actually view polyamory as family. And that's kind of my central view of it. And there are people that I consider part of my poly family that I have no intimacy with whatsoever. Sexual intimacy, yeah, absolutely. I have emotional intimacy or intellectual intimacy with them, or spiritual, yeah. I identify completely as straight, but my wife, she's considering one of my best friends right now, and I love the guy to death. I'll never be physically intimate with him, but he's part of my family, even now, before they're even dating. He's part of my family, and I really welcome it, to be a partner of my wife's. I really like that.
What are your partners' relationships like with each other? How do they deal with each other? And Are they friends? Like, what do you do if you have two partners who really don't like each other, or like, how do you deal with that? Because to me, that seemed like it would be really difficult juggling like so many people that you really care about, and how would you sort of try and make it pleasant for them?
Well, first of all, there's no rule in poly that says that your partners have to all like each other and spend time with each other and sleep in the same bed with you, although it's certainly very nice when it happens. But obviously not ideal. But the other thing is that it's not always up to you to manage your partners either. Everyone involved in a polyamorous relationship is, by definition of the term, a consenting adult. And people find their own relationships. Generally, in poly relationships that I've seen that work well, and in my own relationships, people who are my partner's partners, I have a term for that a lot of us use it. We call it a Metamour, as opposed to your paramour, who is your partner. Your Metamour is one removed, my lover's love. And I feel that, as Quintus was saying, my Metamours are part of my poly family. I'm extremely close to several of my Metamours. They feel like brothers, sisters, family members to me. I have a couple of Metamours who I don't know as well because they might live in a different city and I haven't had an opportunity to get to know them. Or in some cases, in the past, I've had Metamours where we just don't click at all. And being an adult, realizing that this is a person who is a lover of the person that I love, I make a choice as a poly person to at least provide a measure of respect and courtesy to this person because they're important to someone that I love. But I don't force myself to spend all my time with them. And I don't expect them to spend all their time with me. I cultivate a relationship with them as I would any other extended family member, like my brother-in-law. I really like my brother-in-law. He's a nice guy. I don't really want to spend weeks and weeks with him. He's a little bit uptight. He tends to talk a lot about engineering things that I'm not that interested in. But, you know, I love it because he's my sister's husband. And it's sort of, sometimes it's the same with them, of course. So again, people are people, and you find your own relationship. We're all grown-ups, and that's the best way to work it. Isn't that nice? A cool Metamour story?
I just wanted to add that's part of the boundary setting. I know that when I was operating in a multiple situation, one of my partners wanted me to be very close and intimate with one of his other partners, and she did nothing for me at all. And so I had to clarify that that was one of the rules for me, is that he wouldn't try and make that happen. And so that can come into the whole negotiation of how we're going to do this. Some structures, they actually do want everybody to be involved with everybody else. Well, it's going to take more time and a lot more selection, but it can happen. And then others are more spread out. So that's another thing that we talk through.
In our case, some of the partners don't live local, and so running into them is not either not possible entirely or not very often. So developing relationships with those people is a bit difficult. But the ones that are local, there was one that one of my partners was dating that nobody else liked, but the rule in my house is you're polite. And if she comes over for the family meal, you're polite. You don't like her, yeah, you're polite. And the same when the rule with her, she didn't like someone else that was a member of our extended family, and you're polite. Come to my house, you're polite. And that's it. Beyond that, people will form their own relationships or not. And if you find people that really actively do not like each other, they don't have to run into each other to make sure that doesn't happen. It's not necessary for it to happen. But as I said, the two partners that I live with get on really well. I have another partner in Seattle that they talk hockey and it drives me out of my mind. The three of them, when he comes up to visit, they get along fairly well. They're not as close as the two that live with me. And then I have another partner that's local that is part of our poly community. So when they see him at an event, they're polite to chat and whatever, but he doesn't come over to the house and hang out. It's not part of our dynamic. So that's all it works for us. How about you?